Racist cop mocks black woman's ID until he realizes she's a USS senator. A lone streetlight flickered over a nearly empty sidewalk in downtown Washington, D.C., where the hum of traffic wove through the humid night. Janai Richards, a poised and confident black woman, stepped out of her car after a long day of Senate briefings, her heels clicking on the pavement. Though she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone used to speaking in front of an audience, fate had a different plan for her tonight. A patrolling officer, one hand already hovering near his holster, sized her up with a cold, dismissive stare. He had no idea his life was about to change forever. Janai Richards stood outside the warm glow of the city lights, exhaling a weary sigh as she closed her car door on F Street NW in Washington, D.C. It was late, pushing close to midnight, and the day had been endless. Committee hearings, quick coffee meetings, phone calls with constituents, media spots, and a hurried dinner in her Senate office had left her drained. Yet she still held on to a slender thread of energy, that final push to get her home. She was an African-American woman in her early 40s, with an elegant bearing that had come from years of discipline and diligence. Before holding political office, she'd sharpened her wits through law school in Georgetown, clerked for a federal judge, and spent a decade advocating for voting rights in the Deep South. Now, she was a sitting USS senator, well-versed in the nuance of policy battles, unstoppable in a debate, and widely respected by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. But respect in the marble halls of Congress didn't necessarily translate to respect on the streets. Approaching the trunk of her black sedan, Janai realized she'd left her laptop at the office. However, she decided she could do without it until morning. Her exhaustion wouldn't allow a late-night rummage through case studies or unread emails. Instead, she reached in to grab a small folder from the passenger seat. She paused for a moment, letting the cool night air soothe her. The city lights glittered off the mirrored windows of tall buildings. Across the street, a neon sign for Ben's Chili Bowl, a famed local eatery, flickered cheerily. Despite the late hour, the city still throbbed with energy. She just wanted to go home. Her husband, Andre, had texted her half an hour before, "Hey, can't wait to see you. Everything good?" She longed to sink into her couch, maybe watch a comedy special and breathe. But just as she shut the car door, a police cruiser drifted around the corner. Its headlights bathed her in a burst of white light. She paid it no mind at first. People were stopped, questioned, and ticketed all the time here, especially if they paused in a loading zone or double-parked. However, Janai was parked legally. Yet the cruiser slowed further. She felt a prickle of apprehension slide down her spine, but she exhaled slowly to quell it. This wasn't her first brush with police scrutiny, but that didn't make it any easier. She'd had her share of tense interactions, especially during her early years as a civil rights attorney. The driver's side window of the cruiser lowered, revealing a police officer with short, cropped blonde hair, somewhere in his 40s, and a hardened, stern expression. "Hey," he barked, "what are you doing around here at this hour?" Janai's brows furrowed ever so slightly. She swallowed and smiled politely. "Good evening, officer. I'm just grabbing something from my car before heading home." The officer parked, opened his door, and stepped out. The second officer in the cruiser, a younger brunette man, remained in the car, eyes flicking between the sidewalk and the mirrors. The older officer's name tag read O'Donnell. He approached with a swagger that immediately raised Janai's defenses. "You sure about that?" "What's in the folder?" he demanded. She raised the folder with a calm composure. "Just some files for work. Nothing illegal." O'Donnell looked her up and down, the kind of scanning gaze that felt invasive, as if he were dissecting her for possible wrongdoing. He carried a hand close to his holster. "We've had reports of recent break-ins around here," he said flatly. "Mind if I see some identification?" Janai forced a patient smile. Though she was used to presenting her ID at secure government facilities in front of cameras, and for official reasons, she bristled at this particular insinuation. "Officer, I'm legally parked. May I ask if there's a specific reason for this stop?" The second officer, from inside the cruiser, stuck his head out of the window. "Just do what he says," he muttered. Janai sighed softly. "All right," she said, pulling out her wallet. The hush of the night around them made the exchange feel amplified, as if the entire block held its breath. She extended her driver's license, which showed her name and address. "I also have a federal ID, but—" "Oh, a federal ID, huh?" O'Donnell sneered, glancing at her state driver's license briefly. "What? Do you work at the post office or something?" Janai remained poised. "I'm a United States Senator," she replied, but something in O'Donnell's posture told her he wasn't going to believe a single word. Or, worse, he'd believe it and still treat her with suspicion. "Sure you are," he retorted with a mocking laugh, "and I'm the President of the United States." A wave of anger ignited in her chest, but Janai forced it back down. She'd had plenty of training in dealing with confrontation. "Officer," she began slowly, "my name is Janai Richards. I represent the state of Maryland in the USSENATE. I'm parked legally. If you want to confirm who I am, I have my official Senate ID in my purse." His eyes rolled as if he'd heard the wildest lie of his career. "Yeah, well, I hear a lot of stories out here. Why don't you put your hands on the car where I can see them?" The razor-thin veneer of civility cracked. A surge of resentment coursed through Janai. She was exhausted, she was done with the day, and she was done with this. But she also knew that resisting would only heighten the conflict. "Fine," she said, stepping to the side and placing her hands on the trunk of her sedan. O'Donnell approached, snatched her driver's license from her hand, and studied it with theatrical slowness. "Ah," he muttered, "nice ID. Doesn't say senator anywhere on it, does it?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. Janai inhaled deeply. "I told you, my name is Janai Richards. That license is real, it's current, and if you run it through your system, you'll see it matches my identity. I also told you I have a Senate ID in my bag," he scoffed. "Run it through the system. Let's see. Oh, wait. Maybe you have a stolen identity. Gotta watch that, especially around here." The younger officer tapped the horn lightly from inside the cruiser. "Hey, O'Donnell, maybe you should actually shut it," O'Donnell snapped. He flipped the license in his hand. "What kind of senator is out alone at this hour, rummaging through a car on a dark street?" "The kind who works around the clock," Janai said, teeth clenched. "If you let me reach into my bag, I'll show you my official ID." He sized her up again, eyes narrowed. "Sure." Slowly, Janai carefully reached into her purse and pulled out her Senate identification card. She held it out. O'Donnell snatched it and aimed his flashlight at it. A flicker of confusion rippled across his face before morphing into a scornful smirk. "So you had something printed up, huh? Real fancy. This is a crime, you know, pretending to be a government official." It was so absurd, Janai could almost laugh. "That is a legitimate ID," she said firmly. "It has my photo, my title, my position, and my security clearance level. If you contact the Capitol Police or even the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, they can confirm my identity within minutes." "I'm sure they would," he said dismissively. "Let's see what else you have on you." "On me?" She bristled at his tone. "Officer, you have no probable cause to search me." "Probable cause is that I don't believe a word you're saying," he snapped. "And until I do, you're staying right here. Got it?" A swirl of emotions battered Janai: fear, anger, humiliation, but she tightened the coil of her patience, mindful of how a single misstep could escalate the situation. "Officer O'Donnell," she said calmly, trying to read the name on his badge. This is highly inappropriate. Call your station or call the Capitol Police. They will verify who I am. He waved her off. Step over here, he said, pointing her toward the sidewalk, away from the trunk of the car. She complied, though her stomach churned. At that moment, the second officer, his name tag reading Baker, emerged from the cruiser. He wore a concerned expression, as though he recognized the precariousness of the situation. O'Donnell, maybe we should. Hey, I'm handling this, O'Donnell snapped, cutting his younger partner off again. Run her name in the system. If it doesn't come back with a Senate record or something, we've got ourselves a fraud. He turned to Janai. Don't move. Baker took Janai's driver's license and retreated to the cruiser, presumably to run it through the police database. The tension in the air seemed to electrify the night. Janai glanced around, noticing that a couple of passers-by had slowed, casting curious glances. One bystander, an older man in a hoodie, seemed to hold up his phone, possibly recording. Janai felt a surge of relief that at least someone else was paying attention. You must feel really proud of yourself, O'Donnell muttered. Got your fancy clothes, your fancy ID. Think you can waltz around any part of town and do what you want. Janai swallowed. Officer, I'm just trying to go home. But he ignored her words, launching into a tirade. You know how many times I've caught people out here pulling scams, forging government IDs, thinking they can fool me? Now I got someone claiming to be a senator, for crying out loud. At that moment, a crackle came from O'Donnell's radio, followed by Baker's voice from inside the car. O'Donnell, I think you should come here. He eyed Janai skeptically, then slowly walked back toward the cruiser. Janai stood there, hands shaking with pent-up tension. Her ears caught Baker's hesitant tone as O'Donnell leaned in to speak with him. He's realized my identity, she thought. He's about to find out. But the next question in her mind was, how's he going to react? From the window of the cruiser, Janai saw the faint illumination of the computer screen in front of Baker. Their voices were muffled, but she could see O'Donnell freeze. He made a jerky movement, as though scanning the data in disbelief. Then he spun around, rage and embarrassment flickering across his face. Janai met his gaze. He looked like a man cornered, forced to reconsider all the assumptions he'd made in the past 10 minutes. She recognized that look from countless depositions and cross-examinations, a man who'd just realized he was in the wrong, that he'd made a grave mistake. But pride and prejudice rarely melted away so quickly, especially out here, away from cameras and official oversight. O'Donnell stomped back to Janai. His face had turned a deep shade of red. He shoved her Senate ID back into her hand. You should have told me you were a senator right off, he hissed. I did, Janai responded calmly, refusing to let him shift blame. Multiple times. He glared at her as if she were an adversary in a personal vendetta. Well, we'll let you go this time, he said tersely, but you should watch yourself out here. Cities full of dangers. Is that an official warning? She asked, voice steady. Because if so, I'd like your badge number and an official report for this stop. He barked, a laugh devoid of humor. Lady, you want to keep playing that game? I was doing my job. Behind him, Baker approached, trying to defuse the situation. I think we're good here, O'Donnell, he said, his tone placating. We confirmed she's who she says she is. He turned to Janai. Sorry for the inconvenience, Senator. We're just trying to keep the streets safe. And I appreciate your service, she said softly, though her anger was still simmering. But this is unacceptable. I was singled out for no reason other than being here. Baker looked genuinely contrite, but O'Donnell simply radiated resentment. He snatched the driver's license from Baker's hand, shoved it back to Janai, then turned on his heel to march away. Next time, maybe park somewhere less suspicious, he threw over his shoulder. Janai's blood boiled, but she managed to keep her composure. She put her IDs back in her purse, turned, and headed toward her car. A small cluster of bystanders on the opposite sidewalk still eyed the scene. Janai paused by the door, aware of the heavy weight of this encounter. She contemplated letting it go, just driving away, telling herself she was exhausted, that dealing with an official complaint would cost her more time and mental energy than she could spare. Then she realized she had a responsibility to every other person who experienced such discrimination but didn't have the power of a Senate seat behind them. She resolved that come morning, she would address the issue with the city's police department, or perhaps even contact the mayor's office. She couldn't just let this pass without consequences. This wasn't about her alone. This was about a system that too often enabled prejudice and abuse of power. She texted her husband quickly, "Running late, traffic stop, I'm safe, we'll be home soon, love you." Then she climbed into the driver's seat, taking one last look at the police cruiser. O'Donnell stood by the open door, glowering in her direction, while Baker seemed to try and reason with him. Janai shook her head, started the engine, and pulled away. Little did either of them know this single event would escalate into a storm neither the cop nor the senator could have foreseen. Just as Janai slipped under the covers that night, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. She stared at the bedroom ceiling, watching shadows dance as her mind replayed the confrontation. Andre stirred beside her, gently taking her hand. "You can't sleep, can you?" She sighed. "No, I'm angry and unsettled." He pressed a light kiss to her forehead. "You did nothing wrong." "I know," she whispered. "But that Officer O'Donnell, he was so convinced I was up to something because of the color of my skin. If I didn't have my Senate ID, who knows what would have happened?" Andre wrapped an arm around her. "File a complaint, Janai. That's the least you can do." She mulled over the notion, but she recognized this was bigger than a single complaint. The entire reason she ran for office was to fight systemic injustices. Yet, ironically, even as a senator, she couldn't escape them. Eventually, exhaustion won. She drifted off into a restless sleep, her mind churning with plans for the day ahead. By the next morning, Janai's phone was buzzing non-stop. Sometime during the night, footage of the encounter captured by that bystander with the hoodie found its way online. The short clip showed O'Donnell's confrontation with Janai, including his dismissive remarks and the moment he realized she actually was a senator. It had already gone viral. Various hashtags emerged on social media, hashtag driving while black, hashtag Senator Richards, hashtag racist cop, and more. News outlets picked it up, and Janai's press secretary, Monica Blanchard, was frantically texting her, urging that they craft a statement. Janai, wearing her robe and sipping coffee in the kitchen, stared at her phone. Mentions and notifications poured in by the second. Her immediate worry was that this was going to spiral into a political firestorm. She wanted to handle it carefully to avoid overshadowing the legislative battles she was already fighting on the Hill. Yet she knew this matter demanded a response. If she remained silent, it would signal complacency or fear. If she roared too loudly, critics might accuse her of playing the race card. She thought about how precarious the line was on one side. Society demanded her to speak up. On the other side, it would critique the way she did so. But she couldn't just let it fester. She tapped Monica's number and waited. The press secretary answered on the first ring. "Senator, I was just about to call you again," Janai exhaled. "Good morning, Monica." "I see the news. Yes, it's all over Twitter and getting picked up by major outlets. We need a statement or an interview, something to set the record straight. Everybody wants to know how you feel, what you intend to do about it." "I'm heading to the Capitol soon," Janai said. "Let's schedule a press availability outside my office. We can talk then." Are you going to call for O'Donnell to be fired? Monica asked, voice charged with anticipation. People are incensed by his behavior. Janai took a measured breath. I want to see how the police department responds first. And I want to weigh my words carefully. Let's keep it about reform, not a vendetta against one cop. We need to address the bigger issue. Monica paused, then said, All right, Senator, but you should know that the department's spokesperson is calling it a misunderstanding in some outlets. They've put out a statement saying the officers were responding to suspected break-ins in the area and that no harm was done. Janae's jaw tightened. Right, let them spin it. Meanwhile, we'll shine a light on what really happened. Let's also call Councilwoman Patton's office. She's a strong ally on police accountability. Maybe we can coordinate with her. Will do, Monica said. I'll schedule the press conference for this afternoon. Janae hung up, finished her coffee, and went to get ready. She selected a crimson blazer that exuded confidence and a simple black skirt, pinned her Senate lapel pin in place, and pulled her hair into a neat bun. Though she was still rattled by the events of the night before, she reminded herself she had a job to do, one that went far beyond her personal sense of violation. Meanwhile, in a modest brick townhouse across the city, Officer Thomas O'Donnell woke up to a barrage of frantic phone calls. He'd worked the late shift, so he was still half asleep when his phone exploded with texts from colleagues. His heart hammered in his chest as he read the headlines, Viral Video Shows D.C. Officer Mocking Black USS Senators ID Senator Janae Richards targeted in racial profiling incident. O'Donnell's stomach clenched. He replayed the events in his head. He remembered the fury in the woman's eyes. He recalled her words, I'm a United States Senator. At the time, he had refused to believe her. And now, that footage made him look like the poster child for racist policing. He fumbled, pulling on a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, ignoring the half-eaten takeout on his coffee table. Then came the dreaded call from his precinct captain, Captain Lorraine Vasquez. O'Donnell, she began, voice tight. What the hell happened last night? I believed she might have been forging an ID, he blurted, struggling to sound confident. We got a complaint about break-ins. Don't insult me. Vasquez shot back. I read the initial report. You singled her out. She told you who she was, and you still ridiculed her. Now we're dealing with a PR nightmare. The chief wants your badge on his desk by the end of the day. What? You're firing me? After all these years, O'Donnell's face flamed with anger. Administrative leave, pending an investigation, Vasquez clarified in a weary tone. The mayor is outraged, the department's in damage control, and everyone wants a scapegoat. Right now, that's you, he fumed, pacing in tight circles. This is a bunch of bull. She was suspicious, and I was following protocol. People don't realize how dangerous that area is. Don't spin this. The video is very clear. You mocked her ID, you refused to verify it properly, and you made disparaging remarks. You should have listened to your partner. Now your partner's statements corroborate the video, so don't expect him to lie for you. The best I can offer is to say we'll conduct a thorough investigation, but you need to turn in your gun and badge today. He wanted to argue, to curse, but the line went dead. His phone nearly slipped from his sweaty palm. He slumped into a chair, mind racing. His anger twisted inward, a potent mix of shame and stubborn pride. Perhaps, he thought, the public would side with him, that they'd see how these so-called elites strolled around as though the rules didn't apply to them. But deep down, he recognized the precariousness of his position. The department was throwing him to the wolves, and the media was in full frenzy mode. Not long after, a text from an unknown number pinged his phone. Serves you right, racist pig. O'Donnell's face reddened. He turned the phone off. He had to take a shower, get dressed, and head downtown to the station. But as he stood in the bathroom, gazing into the mirror, he felt a creeping doubt. His father had been a cop, and his father's father before him. Policing was in his blood. How did I end up here? He asked himself. Was he really just doing his job, or was he letting old biases and bitterness steer him into shame? He shook his head, refusing to fully examine that line of thought. That woman set me up, he told himself. She just wanted attention. Yet a voice in the back of his mind whispered that it wasn't true, that Janae Richards had done nothing wrong. But he silenced it. Wrapping a towel around his waist, he vowed to fight this with all he had. He wouldn't let one slip-up destroy his entire career. Hours later, Janae Richards walked into her Senate office, greeted by a throng of staffers who looked anxious yet determined. They were used to the daily demands of legislative life, but this day felt different. The tension was palpable. Monica Blanchard ushered Janae into a small conference room where a few high-level staffers were waiting with a flurry of notes and laptops. Okay, the press is going to be outside our office door in about half an hour, Monica said. We have CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, Politico, all wanting a statement. We also got calls from the New York Times, Ebony Magazine, and an invitation from Good Morning America to appear tomorrow. Janae exhaled. All right, let's keep it local first. I want to speak to the local press and the constituents directly. We'll handle national outlets afterward. Let's do a brief presser outside, and then I need to attend the Judiciary Committee meeting at noon. One of her senior advisors, Carla Nguyen, flipped through some notes. The DC. Police have placed Officer O'Donnell on administrative leave. The mayor's office also released a statement condemning the incident. Some are calling for the officer's immediate firing. Others are pointing to the need for more comprehensive police reforms. The ACLU is also calling you, Senator, wanting to know if you'll champion new legislation. Janae's mind churned through possibilities. She wanted to be careful not to overshadow the many other issues on her plate: healthcare reform, a crucial education bill, and ongoing budget negotiations. But this incident touched on a deep moral chord she couldn't ignore. All right, Janae said firmly. Let's outline a few key points I'll make. 1. I'll confirm the facts of the incident, as captured on video. 2. I'll emphasize the systemic problem of racial profiling, not just a single officer's behavior. 3. I'll stress that my position as a senator shouldn't matter. No one should be treated like that. 4. We'll discuss the next steps, ensuring accountability, exploring reforms, and pushing for better training and oversight. Monica nodded briskly, typing notes. Got it. Any calls from my colleagues? Janae asked, curiosity piqued. Carla nodded. Senators from both parties have expressed support. Some want you to use this moment to champion federal police reform legislation. Others are concerned about the backlash or about overshadowing other bills. Janae let out a small laugh, devoid of humor. Politics is always a balancing act. Let's do the presser. Then I'll talk with colleagues about next steps. But let me make one thing clear, I'm not backing down. Monica smiled, relief evident on her face. We're with you. The hallway outside Janae's office was flooded with journalists, cameras and staffers jockeying for position. Microphones jostled to catch her words, and the glare of flashing bulbs made Janae blink. She took her place behind a podium, bearing the official Senate seal, offering a gracious nod to the assembled reporters. Good morning, she began, voice calm but resolute. I am Senator Janae Richards. By now, many of you have seen the video of my recent encounter with a DCPO-LICE officer. Let me start by saying how grateful I am for the swift response from the mayor's office and from Police Chief Samuels, who has placed the officer on administrative leave pending an investigation. Clicking cameras and murmurs rose in waves. Janae raised a hand for quiet. However, she continued, This incident is not simply about one officer. It is about the ongoing reality of racial bias, unconscious or otherwise, that too many Americans face. Last night, I was singled out, questioned harshly, and had my valid credentials mocked solely because I was a black woman in an area where the officer believed I didn't belong. I am deeply aware that, had I not been a US Senator with an official ID, that situation could have ended in a far more troubling manner. It does for many black and brown Americans every day who don't get the benefit of the doubt. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Camera shutters sounded like a flurry of insects. She spotted a few familiar faces in the crowd, reporters she'd worked with on other stories. She continued, "I'm calling on the Metropolitan Police Department to conduct a thorough, transparent investigation. Furthermore, I urge comprehensive reforms to address racial profiling, including ongoing training, improved data collection on traffic stops and detentions, and stronger accountability measures. We cannot keep ignoring a pattern that undermines trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve." A voice piped up. "Senator Richards, do you want Officer O'Donnell fired?" Janai leaned forward, hands gripping the podium. "This is bigger than one person. If the investigation finds wrongdoing, then accountability should be administered according to department policies. But I want to be clear, simply firing one officer will not solve the root problem. Real change requires structural reform. That's what I'm dedicated to pursuing." Another reporter, "What is your message to constituents who see this as proof that racism persists at all levels?" Her gaze flicked toward the camera lenses that lined the back of the hallway. "My message is this: I hear you, I see you, and I stand with you. We will not rest until our laws, our policies, and our institutions reflect justice for all. I encourage everyone who has faced such discrimination to come forward, document it, and seek help from civic organizations, legal aid groups, and elected representatives. Change happens when we shine a light on wrongdoing." Questions rained down, and Janai handled them deftly. She noted her legislative efforts to improve policing nationwide, praising officers who performed their duties with respect and fairness. She expressed hope that this incident could serve as a catalyst for meaningful dialogue and action. After a few more minutes, she gracefully wrapped up the press conference, leaving the media hungry for further developments. As she stepped away from the podium, cameras continued to flash and reporters shouted more questions. She felt the surge of adrenaline ebbing. Monica was at her side in an instant, offering a supportive smile. "You did great, Senator," she whispered, guiding Janai through the throng of onlookers. Yet Janai felt a pang of mixed emotions. She couldn't shake the sense of vulnerability she'd felt the night before, how quickly she'd gone from a respected public servant to a suspect in the eyes of one man with a badge. Nevertheless, she steeled herself. She had a job to do, constituents to represent, and a moral duty to ensure that no other innocent person had to stand, heart-pounding, under the suspicious gaze of someone sworn to protect and serve. What Janai didn't know was that powerful figures were already scrutinizing the unfolding drama with acute interest. In a corner office near the Capitol, lobbyists who opposed police reforms were strategizing. They recognized that Senator Richards might use this personal ordeal to galvanize support for new legislation that could threaten their interests, chiefly those who profited from the current systems of policing, private prisons, and powerful police unions. Meanwhile, across town, activists and community leaders were mobilizing, viewing Janai as a potential champion. Many had tried to reach senators in the past, but now they saw a vital opportunity, a senator who had literally stood in their shoes. And in the D.C. Metropolitan Police Headquarters, top brass wrestled with how to handle O'Donnell's case. Publicly, they condemned his actions. Privately, they worried about what deeper investigations might unearth any pattern of misconduct, complaints that were previously swept under the rug, or data that revealed racially disparate treatment of civilians. All of these forces churned beneath the surface, turning the seemingly simple story of one traffic stop gone wrong into a high-stakes collision of politics, prejudice, and power. Officer Jared Baker fumbled with his tie, a sense of dread settling in his stomach. He had been summoned to a meeting with Internal Affairs that afternoon. The day before, he'd witnessed the entire encounter between O'Donnell and Senator Richards. Since the video leaked online, he'd been plagued by guilt that he hadn't done more to stop his partner's behavior. Even though Baker was lower in rank and had fewer years on the force, he recognized that he had a moral obligation to speak up. He wanted to protect his career, sure, but he also believed in the oath he'd taken to serve and protect. O'Donnell's actions had made a mockery of that oath. Stepping into the nondescript conference room, he greeted two detectives from Internal Affairs with a polite nod. They offered no warmth, just tired eyes. They'd probably been doing interviews non-stop since the video went viral. Officer Baker, one detective said, gesturing toward a chair, "Let's go over your account of last night's stop." Baker forced a swallow. "Yes, sir." Slowly, methodically, he recounted the events as he remembered them. How they had driven by and noticed Senator Richards by her car, how O'Donnell insisted on questioning her, how he himself felt uneasy from the start because she didn't appear to be doing anything wrong, how she produced valid identification, how O'Donnell disregarded it, kept taunting her. Baker admitted that he tried to intervene, but O'Donnell had shut him down. One detective fixed him with a stern look. "Did you or did you not instruct O'Donnell to verify her ID before escalating?" "I did," Baker said, voice wavering. "He wouldn't listen. The other detective scribbled notes. You realize," he said, "this might lead to charges of misconduct against O'Donnell and possibly disciplinary action for any officer who stood by and did nothing." Baker's stomach lurched. "I tried to do something," he insisted. "He's my senior partner. I don't have the authority to override him. But I did suggest we check her ID properly. And as soon as I got my hands on her license, I went to run it in the system. The detective's pen hovered. We'll verify all that. For your sake, I hope your story aligns with the body cam footage, if it exists." He glanced at the other detective, who shook his head slightly, indicating perhaps that O'Donnell hadn't activated his body cam. This wasn't unusual. Many officers neglected or forgot to turn them on, especially if they thought it might complicate their position. Baker's chest tightened. He recognized how precarious his position was, but he also felt relief that the bystander's video existed. That video captured at least part of the truth. Internal Affairs dismissed him, promising to be in touch. He left the building feeling a knot of dread, wondering if his career would ever be the same again, and if doing the right thing would cost him everything. After the press conference, Janae settled into her office to prepare for the Judiciary Committee meeting, but she was interrupted by a knock on her door. It was Senator Caroline Mitchell from Massachusetts, one of Janae's close allies on civil rights issues. "Janae," Senator Mitchell said, stepping in with open arms. "How are you holding up?" Janae stood, allowing the hug. "I'm fine, just a little overwhelmed." Mitchell shook her head, eyes glinting with empathy. "I can't believe what happened. Then again, I can believe it, which is what's so tragic." Janae sighed. "Exactly. This isn't new. But the fact that it happened to me, a senator, makes it harder for people to ignore." "How many times does this happen every day to people without the platform to speak out?" Mitchell nodded. "Let's use this moment. I've been drafting some legislation aimed at improving police accountability, requiring federal oversight of local departments that show patterns of civil rights violations. It's been collecting dust because we couldn't get enough bipartisan support. Janai regarded her colleague with interest. You think this incident changes the climate enough to push it forward? Mitchell shrugged, a steely determination in her gaze. It might. At least it'll get public attention. If we combine it with other reforms like body camera mandates, better data collection on traffic stops, it could be a comprehensive bill. We need your voice now more than ever. A flicker of hope warmed Janai's heart. I'm in, she said decisively. Let's do it. We'll gather allies. We'll hold hearings. And we'll show the public that we're not just talking, we're acting. Mitchell beamed. I'll send you the draft. We can start rewriting, add your perspective, maybe hold a press conference next week. Janai smiled in return. Let's do it. As Mitchell left, Janai felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was these moments turning personal pain into legislative action that defined why she served. She wouldn't let this personal attack on her dignity go unanswered. She would harness the outrage and attention to drive real, lasting change, even if it meant facing fierce opposition. Back in his cramped apartment, O'Donnell seethed as he paced the living room. The notification was official. He was on unpaid administrative leave. Pending the outcome of the investigation, his career, pension, and reputation were all at risk. As he threw himself onto the threadbare couch, he turned on the television to find yet another news segment featuring Senator Richards. She spoke passionately about reform, condemning the sort of biases he had exemplified. She talked about bridging divides, about how no one should be harassed for existing while black. The camera cut to the footage of him sneering at her ID. His face was plastered on screens across the nation. He snatched his remote and hurled it across the room, heart pounding with rage and humiliation. She's going to cost me everything. He brooded, swallowing the bitter truth that he had, indeed, been in the wrong. But accountability wasn't in his vocabulary. At that moment, vengeance was. He rummaged through old phone numbers until he found one that belonged to an acquaintance, A. Local reporter known for sensational, borderline, tabloid stories. Maybe he could feed a narrative that would harm Janai's credibility. She must have skeletons in her closet, he thought grimly. Everyone does. After a few rings, a voice answered, sounding bored. Hello, you've reached Leslie Poole, Metro Watch Online. Leslie O'Donnell said, forcing calm into his tone. This is Officer Thomas O'Donnell. You might have seen me in the news. There was a pause. He could almost hear her eyebrows shoot up. Yes, I have. I'm surprised you're calling me. He clenched a fist. I want to set the record straight. And I've got a tip for you. Something about Senator Richards you might want to look into. Poole's tone sharpened with interest. Oh? I'm listening. A slow, cold grin spread across O'Donnell's face. He had no specific dirt on Janai. Not yet, but he was sure he could concoct something or find a tenuous thread that Poole could sensationalize. All he needed to do was plant a seed of doubt in the public's mind about Janai's integrity. Turn the tables. After all, wasn't that how the media game worked? I need to confirm some details first, he lied smoothly. But trust me, this story will be huge. I'll be in touch. He ended the call, adrenaline surging. He'd show them all. The conversation with Poole was the first step in a desperate plan. A plan that, if successful, could destroy Janai's reputation and overshadow the truth of what he'd done. Days turned into a week. The scandal remained front-page news, but life carried on for Janai as she continued her Senate duties. Meanwhile, O'Donnell, stewing in bitterness, scoured every corner of the internet for anything that could taint Janai's name. He was determined to tear her down before the internal investigation destroyed him. He found an old rumor from years ago. When Janai had been a civil rights attorney in Louisiana, there'd been a case involving a wrongful conviction lawsuit. The rumor, stoked by extremist blogs, claimed Janai helped free a dangerous criminal who later reoffended. In reality, Janai's client had been a teenager wrongfully convicted of a minor crime. No reoffense ever occurred. But facts hardly mattered to someone like O'Donnell, not if he could spin a false narrative. He dug deeper, hunting for official documents, reading appeals, piecing together half-truths to feed the reporter. This pursuit consumed him, overshadowing any introspection or remorse he might have felt. He told himself it was justice, that she was a self-righteous hypocrite. In truth, he was desperate to salvage his pride. At the same time, Janai's staff uncovered O'Donnell's trail of complaints. He'd been accused of using excessive force in 3 prior instances, though each complaint was dismissed or settled quietly. The investigation by Internal Affairs now had more reason to dig. The city was abuzz with talk of possibly charging O'Donnell with misconduct. Some activists demanded criminal charges, but that remained uncertain. In the midst of drafting a landmark police reform bill with Senator Mitchell and other allies, Janai was blindsided when Leslie Poole's sensational article dropped on Metro Watch Online. Senator who cried racism freed violent criminal. Is she endangering public safety? The piece rehashed old misinformation, claiming Janai's legal advocacy had unleashed a dangerous felon onto the streets. It was laced with insinuations that she had done it for personal profit, pointing to a supposed shadow donation from a civil rights group. The article's sources were anonymous, but Janai had a strong suspicion who'd planted them. At first, Janai tried to brush it off, just another piece of tabloid trash. But within hours, right-wing media outlets picked it up, ignoring the factual corrections that legitimate sources quickly offered. The swirling misinformation threatened to undermine Janai's momentum on police reform. Her office was inundated with calls and emails from confused constituents, many of whom didn't realize it was a smear campaign. Andre found her late at night in the living room, reading the article with a disgusted frown. "You know this is garbage," he said gently. She closed the laptop. "Of course I do. But some people will believe it anyway." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Fight back with the truth. You've done it before. You can do it again." She smiled at him, gratitude mixing with frustration. "I will, but the timing is no coincidence. Someone wants to throw me off my game and keep me from passing real reforms." "Then don't let them," Andre said, voice resolute. He was right. Janai prepared a thorough rebuttal and demanded Metro Watch Online run a correction. She compiled evidence proving the innocence of her former client and showed that the donation was a routine legal defense fund. Eventually, mainstream outlets picked up her side of the story and the truth came to light. But the smear had done some damage, riling up Janai's political adversaries and sapping energy from her push for reform. O'Donnell's smear tactic was only partially effective. It planted doubts among certain segments of the public, but never gained the traction he'd hoped for. Meanwhile, his own disciplinary hearing loomed. Convinced that everything was Janai's fault, he swallowed his pride and reached out to a police union lawyer. They advised him to lay low, let the process unfold, maybe issue a public apology. But O'Donnell refused to apologize. He believed that would be admitting guilt. "I'm not guilty," he kept saying, ignoring the mounting evidence that proved otherwise. At last, the day came for his hearing before an internal disciplinary board. Officer Baker testified about the events of that night, recounting how Janai presented valid ID and how O'Donnell mocked her. 3 prior complaints from civilians were re-examined, painting a disturbing pattern of bias. The final blow came when the board read out transcripts of O'Donnell's radio communications and a corroborating statement from the bystander who recorded the viral video. Before the board retired to deliberate, O'Donnell was given a chance to speak. He stood, hands shaking with anger, and said, "I was doing my job. That woman put on airs, claiming to be a senator, and I had a duty to check her out. Anyone else would do the same. I'm being crucified in the media because she's playing the race card." No one seemed moved by his words. Even some of the officers in the room avoided his eyes. The board left, and in less than half an hour they returned. The verdict, termination, effective immediately, with a recommendation that any future law enforcement employer be fully informed of his record and these proceedings. O'Donnell felt his world collapse. After nearly 2 decades on the force, it was all over. In a haze of disbelief and fury, he left the station, ignoring the cameras and microphones that followed him down the steps. The press demanded comments, but he shouldered past them, retreated to his car, and slammed the door. Tears of rage stung his eyes. He felt humiliated, betrayed, and alone. He blamed Janae Richards for it all, refusing to see his own actions as the catalyst. When the news broke that O'Donnell had been fired, Janae was relieved, but she also felt a pang of sorrow that the situation had unfolded so predictably. The cycle of racism, denial, exposure, and scapegoating happened over and over again. Would real change follow? Still, she noted the shift in public opinion. More people were calling for structural reforms, not just symbolic firings. Momentum gathered behind the new bill Janae and her allies were drafting. A wave of public support swept across social media. Even some moderate senators who previously waffled on police reform announced they were open to negotiations. Late one afternoon, Janae stepped outside the Capitol and saw a small group of supporters gathered with signs that read, "We stand with Senator Richards and end racial profiling now." She approached them smiling. One woman in her 50s looked up in awe. "Thank you for standing up for us," she told Janae, voice trembling. "My grandson went through something similar last year. He wasn't as lucky." Janae's throat constricted. She reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. "That's why I'm doing this," she replied softly. "We can't let it keep happening." The woman nodded tearfully. "You're fighting for more than yourself. Bless you, Senator." Janae recognized, more than ever, that the little victory of O'Donnell's dismissal was not the end goal. True victory would be making sure that no one else suffered because of prejudice. And so she promised to keep going. O'Donnell's downfall was swift and harsh. Without the steady paycheck or benefits, and with a tarnished name, he struggled to find a new job. His lawyer managed to broker a settlement that allowed him to keep some of his pension, but it was only a fraction of what he would have had if he'd retired with a clean record. Bills piled up, and one by one, friends in law enforcement distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the fiasco. His attempts to stir up more dirt on Janae failed. Leslie Poole realized the story was a dead end and stopped returning his calls. Angry at the world, O'Donnell found himself on a bar stool more nights than not, drowning his regrets in stale beer and muttered curses. A few times, he thought about confronting Janae directly or going after the bystander who filmed him, but deep down he understood how futile and illegal that would be. If he tried, he'd only sink further. And so, his karma played out quietly, a slow, grinding fall into obscurity and financial ruin, haunted by the knowledge that he was the architect of his own misfortune. Meanwhile, Janae's legislative efforts bore fruit. The Community Police Accountability and Reform Act made it through the Judiciary Committee with bipartisan support, thanks to public pressure and her savvy negotiations. A companion bill in the House also found champions. Though the final version was not as strong as Janae had initially wanted, politics is the art of compromise. It included important provisions, expanded data collection on racial profiling, mandatory anti-bias training, enhanced community oversight boards, and tighter standards for use of force. When the bill passed the Senate floor, Janai felt an overwhelming swell of emotion. She stood among her colleagues, receiving handshakes and hugs. The journey had been arduous, and the fight was far from over. There would be further battles, further amendments, further tests of will, but this milestone was significant. It was one step closer to a world in which no one, regardless of race, status, or background, could be subjected to the scorn and suspicion that Janai had faced that fateful night. Months after the viral stop, Janai found herself walking on that same street in Washington, D.C. This time, it wasn't late at night, and she wasn't alone. She was with Andre, heading to an event at a local community center. The memory of that tense moment flashed through her mind, but she smiled softly. The city felt different now, an undercurrent of hope in the air, even if they still had miles to go. As they passed the spot where she'd been confronted by O'Donnell, Andre gently squeezed her hand. "You okay?" She nodded. "Better than ever. Let's keep going." And so they did. Janai Richards, USS Senator, walked forward resolute, unafraid, and fiercely committed to justice. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that prejudice and hatred would not vanish overnight. But she also knew that together, people could push for change, hold institutions accountable, and one day create the fair, inclusive future they all deserved. Thank you for watching this dramatic and powerful story of how a routine traffic stop turned into a powerful lesson about prejudice, courage, and transformation. Senator Janai Richards refused to back down, even when confronted with a racist officer who belittled her every word, only to realize she held one of the highest offices in the land. Through grit, determination, and a steadfast sense of justice, she fought not just for herself, but for every person who has ever been wrongfully profiled or harassed because of the color of their skin. And in the end, her stand helped bring about meaningful change. If you found this story moving, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to share it with your friends and family. This is a message everyone needs to hear. Finally, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an inspiring story that challenges us to be better. Thank you.